They always say, if he left, he didn't care. But what if that's a lie? What if you could make him feel your absence so deeply? He questions everything, even with someone new, not through begging, not through games, but by becoming someone his unconscious mind can't ignore. Because the truth is, when you do this, he will come back, even if he doesn't understand why. Individuation. Becoming whole. Have you ever wondered why some people seem magnetic without even trying? It's not beauty, not charm, it's something deeper. It's the reflection of a silent process called individuation. Jung said this path is about becoming whole, not just good or acceptable. But this path demands courage and the willingness to abandon illusions. Most of us live fragmented, trying to hide anger, deny neediness, or fake independence, and then we search for someone to emotionally glue our broken parts. But that never lasts, because no one came to complete what only we can integrate. True healing begins when we look inward with brutal honesty. Do you feel seen only when you're with someone? That you only feel alive if someone desires you? That's the echo of a void, not love. Individuation begins exactly there, when you stop begging for what you haven't yet given yourself, when you realize the other was just a mirror of your abandonment, and that's when everything shifts. Because the more you recognize yourself, the more your self-awareness grows. You begin to notice patterns, needs you disguised, masks you wore, silences that hid screams. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of psychic liberation. But the process is uncomfortable and frightening. The shadow emerges, and with it, discomfort. You realize that control, seduction, even victimhood were unconscious ways of avoiding the void. But Jung said, what you don't bring into consciousness controls you. Individuation demands confrontation with what you've most avoided, and that's where your strength is born. In that deep dive, you learn you don't need to be better to be loved. You need to be whole. And that includes pain, fear, anger. It includes everything you've tried to hide for years. Inner reconciliation isn't about perfection, it's about totality. And that totality is what radiates true psychological magnetism. Whole people don't ask for love. They inspire it. They carry a different energetic field, not from arrogance, but emotional coherence. It's as if the other's unconscious recognizes they're someone who found themselves. And that recognition draws others in. Even someone who left feels it. But hear this, it's not a tactic to win them back. It's a real internal transformation. You don't act to get attention. You change because you can't stand living outside yourself anymore. Your energy shifts, your gaze shifts, your silence shifts. And this new state of presence speaks louder than words. To individuate is to stop living based on what others want. To quit manipulating or seducing just to be accepted. To leave behind the role of the invisible needy one and step into someone who knows their own worth. That creates a sharp contrast because now you don't beg. You attract effortlessly, and this power doesn't make noise. It's subtle, like a rare scent. Those who need it sense it, and those who sense it never forget. Jung called it psychic reconciliation, when anima and animus start dancing within you. And that dance creates balance, something the modern world can't quite grasp. Presence. This state of inner balance can't be taught. It's emitted. That's why people chase formulas, but nothing works. Because without psychic integration, everything feels hollow. Someone can repeat affirmations, but the vibe won't lie. And the other's unconscious picks up on it with almost supernatural clarity. You begin to notice. The more you know yourself, the less you need to convince anyone. What was once anxiety becomes clarity. What was once desperation becomes direction. This is where individuation touches the soul, because you're no longer editing yourself to fit the world. You expand, and that's irresistible. But of course, this path has a cost. You lose people, illusions, certainties, because not everyone can handle your new authenticity. But those who stay see something rare. Someone with emotional maturity, someone who doesn't need games anymore, just truth. And this truth is fierce. It's not here to please, it's here to liberate. And in doing so, it transforms everything around you, even what seemed lost. Because now you're not trying to return to the past. You're creating a new center, a center of personal power. And that is impossible to ignore. And the strangest part? When you stop chasing, what's truly yours starts missing you. It's not magic, it's psyche in motion, the unconscious responding to your new vibration. You're no longer available for crumbs, and that absence becomes presence, a presence that runs deep. And maybe now you're starting to realize true reconciliation isn't about bringing them back. It's about coming back to yourself. Because when you become whole, everything around you reorganizes. But this, most people haven't figured out yet. And that's why the next step is so crucial. Projections and idealizations. When you fell in love, did you love the person or the story you created about them? Jung believed that most relationships begin not with true connection, but with projection. You weren't seeing them. You were seeing your wounds, hopes, and desires wrapped in their form. And that illusion can be intoxicating until it shatters. You didn't fall for him, you fell for what he represented. Maybe safety, adventure, validation, or redemption. But none of that was him. It was your unconscious painting symbols over his face. This is what Jung meant by projection, the act of assigning your unprocessed psyche onto another. And that is dangerous, because projections feel like truth. They blind you gently. They make your shadow fall in love with its own echo. You think you've found a soulmate, but often it's your inner child meeting a fantasy. And when reality begins to emerge, so does the tension. You start seeing the cracks, but still want the dream. And here's the paradox. The more you cling to the illusion, the more the real connection dies. Why? Because no one can live up to being your savior, your parent, your ideal. They're human, flawed, conflicted, just like you. But when the illusion fades, so does your emotional script. And that's where the chaos begins. Many breakups don't happen because of betrayal or distance. They happen because the spell wore off. The unconscious projection was withdrawn. You saw him clearly for the first time, and maybe you saw yourself too. That moment, painful as it is, holds the seed of individuation, if you choose to face it. Jung taught that relationships are mirrors, not of who the other is, but of what you hide. The partner becomes a canvas where your anima or animus is projected. You don't fall in love with them, you fall in love with what you've disowned within yourself. And that, right there, is the trap. Imagine someone projecting their deep longing for emotional safety onto a partner. Suddenly, every absence feels like abandonment. Every silence becomes a rejection. But is it real? Or is it a replay of childhood? Pain? That's why projection distorts love. It creates ghosts and names them truth. But here's where things shift. When you become self-aware, the projections lose power. You start to see when you're reacting to him, or to a memory, wearing his face. That pause, that moment of reflection, is revolutionary. It creates space. Space for authenticity, for healing, for clarity. You want to win someone back? Don't chase. Don't perform. Instead, withdraw your projections. Let them collapse. Let yourself see them, not through the lens of hope or regret, but as they truly are. And in doing so, you let them see you, the real you, not the one trying to be perfect or forgiven. That shift changes everything, because now the interaction is no longer driven by unconscious needs. It's led by conscious detachment. You're not begging for love, you're offering presence, and that presence is magnetic. Not because you want something, but because you've already found it within, and when someone feels seen without being needed, it disarms them. They sense something rare, emotional maturity. You're not projecting anymore. You're reflecting. That's a psychological power few people develop, and it doesn't just transform relationships, it transforms you. Think of it like this. Projection is smoke, but your true self is the flame. When you stop blowing illusions into the room, the fire becomes visible, warm, steady, real. That's the core of personal growth. Not making others love you, but seeing clearly enough to finally love without distortion. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That includes who you fall for, who you miss, who you chase. Recognizing projection is the first key to freedom, and with that freedom comes something rare, authenticity. But we're not done yet. Because even after recognizing projection, something else often lingers, the pain of letting go, the grief of losing not just the person, but the dream they carried. And that leads us into the next layer of the journey, one that few dare to explore, but you must. Shadow, the unacknowledged side of the self. You think you're in control, but what if I told you? It's the part of you that you deny the most that's actually pulling the strings. Jung called it the shadow, the repressed, rejected, and hidden side of your psyche. And unless you confront it, it will sabotage everything you try to build, especially love. You say you're jealous because you care. You're clingy because you love deeply. But is that really it? Or is it fear of abandonment masquerading as passion? Your shadow doesn't scream, it whispers. It drives you to overreact, to punish, to beg, all while convincing you it's justified. That's how it wins. And in relationships, the shadow is a master manipulator. It makes you see threats where there are none. It feeds off silence, creates stories, and blames the other for your inner chaos. But the truth? It's not about them. It's about what you haven't faced in yourself. And the longer you avoid it, the louder it gets. You may have said things you regret, or acted from a place of panic. That wasn't just you being emotional. That was the shadow lashing out. Jung said that whatever remains unconscious becomes fate. If you don't see your shadow, it becomes your partner, your pattern, your prison. And here's the brutal twist. Most people project their shadow onto others. You accuse them of being cold when it's your own emotional numbness. You call them needy but secretly fear not being needed. Projection and shadow walk hand in hand. And together they distort reality. But once you become self-aware enough to ask, why did I really react like that? The spell breaks. That's the beginning of shadow work. You're no longer blaming the mirror. You're studying your own reflection. It's uncomfortable. It burns, but it liberates. That's where psychic integration begins. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You need to be honest, raw, aware. When you own your shadow, it stops controlling you. It becomes an ally instead of an enemy. And in that shift, something profound happens. You start showing up in relationships with emotional presence, not performance. That presence creates safety, not just for you, but for the other. Suddenly the chaos calms. The games fade. There's no more pretending. Because when you've met your own darkness, you don't fear theirs. That's the true meaning of inner transformation, and that's when intimacy begins. It's easy to say, they didn't understand me. But did you understand your own triggers? Did you look at how your fear of being abandoned made you cling tighter, or how your insecurity disguised itself as control? That's shadow, and it doesn't go away just because the relationship ends. In fact, breakups often activate the shadow. The rejection brings out the parts you thought were buried, the anger, the desperation, the shame. But here's the key. If you face those parts instead of numbing them, they become a doorway, a path to self-awareness, to real personal growth. Most people jump into distractions, a rebound, a glow-up, I'll show him what he lost phase. But that's the shadow in disguise. True transformation isn't loud. It's quiet. It happens in solitude, in journaling, in brutal self-reflection. It's in the silence where your unconscious finally speaks, and what it says is often hard. To hear, you used him to avoid yourself. You wanted her to love the part of you you've never accepted. These truths sting, but they're necessary, because the only way out of your emotional patterns is through them. That's the Jungian path. Not escape, but integration. When you face your shadow, you unlock personal power, not because you become fearless, but because you no longer fear your own complexity. You become emotionally mature. You stop overreacting to every trigger and instead respond calmly, consciously. That kind of presence is rare and irresistible, and as your inner balance grows, something shifts in the external world too. People notice. The same person who left might sense it, even if they can't explain. Why? Because now you're not projecting, you're radiating, and that radiance sets the stage for something deeper, something real. Psychological attraction to wholeness. Ever wonder why some people seem magnetic even after a breakup? It's not looks, it's not charm, it's psychological wholeness. When someone goes through individuation and integrates their shadow, they become rare, and the unconscious mind is drawn to what's rare because it hints at completion. You see, people aren't attracted to perfection, they're attracted to coherence, to a calm, grounded presence that doesn't need validation. That kind of emotional presence is unsettling in the best way. It makes others question what they've been chasing and why they suddenly feel like they're missing something. Jung understood that when the psyche becomes more integrated, it emits a different frequency. You stop being needy, reactive, or performative. Instead, your presence becomes a quiet force, and that force doesn't beg. It simply exists, and its very existence creates psychological magnetism. It's like this: when you become whole, you stop radiating desperation, and when that happens, even someone who's moved on notices. They might not admit it. They might not act on it. But deep down, their unconscious registers the shift. And once that seed is planted, it grows. People aren't just attracted to looks, they're drawn to energy. And wholeness radiates a frequency that says, "I'm enough." That message doesn't scream, it whispers. And that whisper is powerful, especially in a world full of noise. It cuts through the chaos and creates a pull that's hard to resist. You don't have to do anything to make them come back. You just have to become someone whose energy speaks louder than words. That's inner transformation. It's not about chasing love. It's about embodying the kind of love that doesn't chase. That kind of self is unforgettable. And here's the twist. Even if they're with someone new, the comparison happens unconsciously. The new person may offer novelty, but not depth, not integration, not the kind of emotional maturity that only comes from facing your shadow. And once you've done that, you become a mirror they can't escape, because now you're not reacting from pain. You're responding from presence. You don't try to prove anything. You simply live from your center. And that center, calm, clear, and confident, creates a contrast so strong that it disrupts whatever illusion they're living in. You become living proof of what they could have had, if they had been ready. And sometimes that realization hits harder than any words ever could. It creates longing, not for who you were, but for who you've become. That's the power of authenticity, that psychological impact. And even if they never come back, it doesn't matter, because you didn't transform to get them back. You transformed to come back to yourself. That shift alone changes your entire relational field. You attract differently. You relate differently. You no longer settle for echoes of love. Wholeness becomes your standard, not intensity, not drama, but inner balance. And from that place, your relationships begin to reflect your inner integration. You stop playing roles. You start living truth. And truth, in a world full of masks, is magnetic. This isn't about pretending to be healed. It's about doing the real work, the shadow work, the inner reconciliation. And from that process, you rise, not above others, but deeper into yourself. That depth is what others feel, even from miles away, even in silence, and that silence can be louder than any message. Because when someone feels your absence, not your neediness, but your absence, they begin to feel their own disconnection. And in that mirror, the truth speaks, loudly, clearly, relentlessly. And so we arrive at a critical realization. Attraction isn't something you fabricate, it's something you become. Through individuation, through self-awareness, through emotional maturity. But before that transformation can solidify, something else needs to happen. Something radical. Deep self-knowledge. Breakups aren't just about losing someone, they're invitations to meet yourself. When the silence sets in and the distraction disappears, what remains is a mirror. One that doesn't reflect them, but reflects you. And that's where the real journey begins. Into the depths you've long avoided. Ask yourself, what did this relationship reveal about me? Not about them, about you, your patterns, your reactions, your needs. This is where self-awareness is born, not in the happy moments, but in the collapse. In the wreckage, truth emerges. You may realize you sought validation more than connection, or that you confused intensity with love. Maybe you expected them to fix a wound they didn't cause. These insights hurt, but they're sacred. They open the door to personal growth, the kind that lasts. Jung believed that suffering was not meaningless, but purposeful. It carves space in the psyche, space for new insight, new integration, new selfhood. When you stop blaming and start questioning, you shift from victim to alchemist. From why did they leave me to what am I now able to see? Look at your relationship history. Patterns will emerge. You might notice you always attract emotionally unavailable people, or that you lose yourself in love. These aren't coincidences. They're unconscious repetitions. And until you face them, they'll keep choosing for you. Self-knowledge is not a passive reflection. It's an active excavation. It demands you dig through the rubble of your defenses. It asks uncomfortable questions like, who am I when I'm not being chosen? Why do I fear being alone? What part of me have I abandoned to be loved? The more honest you are, the more you reclaim. You begin to gather lost fragments, wounded parts, abandoned dreams, forgotten truths. And those fragments, when embraced, form something unshakable. A self that no longer depends on external confirmation. That is the root of authenticity, and with authenticity comes clarity. You start to see who fits into your life, not based on desire, but alignment. You no longer mistake chaos for chemistry. You no longer chase people who trigger your trauma. You choose differently. Because now you are different. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes in waves. Some days you feel powerful, other days raw and hollow. But every tear, every insight, every sleepless night contributes to your individuation. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. That's the secret most miss. People want to move on fast, heal quickly, rebrand themselves. But true inner transformation is slow, sacred, and often ugly. It requires you to sit in the discomfort and listen, to let your unconscious rise without judgment. That's the terrain of analytical psychology, and it's where change begins. The goal is not to forget them. The goal is to remember you, to remember the parts of you that got silenced, overlooked, or outsourced in the relationship. When you return to those parts, you reclaim power. Not power over others, but personal power rooted in truth. And here's what's wild. The deeper you know yourself, the less others confuse you. You stop being reactive. You stop performing. You start showing up with emotional maturity. And that alone changes the entire dynamic of every future relationship, including the one with your past. Because now, if they ever come back, they won't meet the old you. They'll meet someone they don't recognize but can't ignore, someone calm, clear, whole. And in that mirror, they'll either rise or retreat. Either way, you've already won. You're no longer chasing, you're choosing, but But there's still one step that amplifies this transformation. A paradox, one that feels like surrender but is secretly power. And it's the next key on this path of inner alignment and liberation. Let's talk about it. Conscious detachment. The moment you stop chasing, something unexpected happens. Things start moving toward you. This isn't spiritual fluff, it's psychological reality. Jung knew the psyche reacts to pressure, and when you release that pressure, you shift the dynamic. That's the paradox of conscious detachment. Detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means presence without control. It's when you hold space for someone without trying to bend their will. You love without clinging. You grieve without collapsing. That kind of strength creates an energy others feel, even from afar. When you detach consciously, you reclaim your center. You're no longer driven by fear or scarcity. You're rooted, grounded. This emotional presence says, I want you, but I don't need you. That's rare. And because it's rare, it's incredibly attractive, especially to those who took your energy for granted. People sense when they're free to leave, and paradoxically, that freedom often pulls them closer. Why? Because the absence of resistance feels safe. It's not manipulation, it's maturity. It's the refusal to beg, to convince, to distort yourself for validation. That calmness is power. Think about it. When someone clings to you, do you feel love or pressure? Now flip it. Your desperation might have been misread as control. But when you let go, truly let go, you allow space for genuine desire to arise. Not fear-based attachment, but authentic connection. And here's the truth no one wants to hear. Detachment might bring them back, or it might not. But either way, you win, because your peace is no longer dependent on their presence. That's emotional maturity. That's the psychological magnetism Jung referred to, the pull of the integrated self. You stop living in reaction. You start responding. No more late-night texts. No more overanalyzing their silence. You rest in your own stillness. And from that stillness, clarity emerges. Clarity about what you deserve, about what you've been tolerating, about what you won't repeat. This doesn't mean closing your heart. It means opening it wider, but not to just anyone. You become selective with your energy, not out of pride, but out of wisdom, because now you know. Connection without freedom is not love. It's dependency, and you've outgrown that. You start seeing your past behavior not as shameful, but as understandable. You were seeking safety in another. You just didn't know how to give it to yourself yet. But now, you're learning. You're cultivating inner balance, and that balance radiates louder than words. Letting go isn't passive. It's a fierce internal act. It's the moment you stop trying to rewrite the past and start writing your future. You close the chapter, not out of bitterness, but with grace. And in that closing, you open yourself to a new kind of power. Personal power rooted in presence. When you no longer try to control outcomes, you align with your authentic self. You stop performing. You start being. And that beingness has weight. It has gravity. People feel it. They don't know why they're thinking of you more. But something about you lingers. Even if they're with someone else, the energetic shift is real. They feel it in your absence, in the silence that no longer begs, in the peace that doesn't include them anymore. And it forces a reflection. Sometimes that reflection is louder than your presence ever was. But remember, this isn't a trick. It's not reverse psychology. It's the inevitable result of self-awareness and individuation. You've stopped outsourcing your worth, and now even your detachment has presence. It's not empty. It's full of self, of strength, of truth. And as this new version of you settles in, one final element begins to awaken within. Something ancient, something unconscious. The inner masculine and feminine forces, your anima and animus, begin to move, and that movement changes everything. Living with purpose and presence. Presence is the quietest form of power. You don't need to speak louder, move faster, or try harder. When you're rooted in who you are, your very being communicates wholeness. Jung would call this the energy of the integrated self, a life no longer driven by compensation, but by essence. And essence doesn't beg to be seen. Most people live as echoes of expectation. They wake up chasing approval, adjusting themselves to avoid rejection. But living like that slowly dissolves the self. Presence begins the moment you stop performing and start inhabiting your body, your breath, your truth. It's not performance, it's embodiment, and then comes purpose, not as a career or mission, but as direction. It's the quiet conviction that your life is moving in alignment with your soul, not your survival instincts. This inner alignment is magnetic. You don't need to try, you resonate. And people feel that difference. A person who lives with purpose carries emotional maturity. They don't rush. They don't over-explain. Their energy is anchored. And this kind of inner balance, as Jung noted, arises not from controlling life, but from reconciling with it. That reconciliation radiates as psychological magnetism. When you pursue what fulfills your spirit, art, study, healing, creation, you stop outsourcing meaning to others. You stop needing a relationship to feel alive. You become the source of aliveness. That shift isn't loud, but it changes everything about how people respond to you. Even those who left begin to feel it. Not consciously, perhaps, but something in them senses it. The absence of your old neediness, the presence of your inner light. You are no longer orbiting them. They begin to orbit the version of you that now glows from within. Not for them, for you. Jung described the individuated being as someone who lives from the self, not the ego. That self is not reactive, not hungry for applause. It simply is. And the more you live from that place, the more powerful your silence becomes, your nonchalance, your inner stability. Others may still chase drama or intensity, but you no longer resonate with that frequency. You seek depth, calm, realness. And because your presence now embodies those values, you repel what's misaligned. You no longer need to block or cut off people. They simply drift away on their own. You become a living boundary, not through words, but through energy. And that boundary doesn't isolate, it clarifies. You begin to attract from your center, not your wounds, and that shift is irreversible. Because once you taste the clarity of being whole, you can't go back to fragments. It's not about being unemotional, it's about being emotionally clear. Presence doesn't erase feeling, it channels it, with intention, with awareness. And that, in the Jungian sense, is where personal growth becomes visible. When every interaction reflects your integration. People will say, "You've changed," and you have. Because now you move through the world with conscious detachment. You don't chase what leaves. You don't cling to what confuses. You observe, discern, and choose. That's not arrogance. It's self-respect born from inner work. And in this state, even your solitude becomes sacred. You're no longer lonely. You're aligned. Your daily life becomes a ritual of authenticity. Your passions are no longer distractions. They're expressions of your wholeness. And that devotion to yourself creates emotional presence. What once felt like a broken heart now feels like a redirection. What once felt like rejection now feels like refinement. Because your life is no longer about avoiding pain. It's about living with meaning. That meaning anchors you. And that anchor is what others unconsciously long for. But we're not done. Because once you're anchored in purpose and presence, something deeper begins to stir. A reorganization of your entire psychic field, your relationship with masculine and feminine energies, your projections, your emotional availability, and that's where we go next. So now you know, it was never about chasing him. It was about remembering the parts of you that you gave away just to be seen. What would change in your life if you stopped waiting and started becoming? Are you still trying to be loved by someone who never truly saw yourself? Or are you finally ready to become the person who no longer needs to be chosen, to feel whole? If this message stirred something inside you, don't let it fade. Leave a comment below. What part of this hit the deepest? And if you're ready to go deeper on this journey with us, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay close. You're not alone. We're in this together.